Will the Third World War ever happen? Because given a situation of Russia-Ukraine war happening, everybody is possibly talking about a Third World War. Will it happen? The United States President said the war or the World War will happen when the Americans will start shooting at the Russians. But for the time being, I don't think there is a scenario which is going to happen. And in this, definitely one key important factor which everybody talked is about the NATO. What do you mean by NATO? What is it all about? When you talk about NATO, everybody tells you that this is an association, a collective between 30 countries around the world, countries of North America and countries of Europe. Why are they actually on a collective basis? Why are they associating with each other? And in this context, what do you mean by the Washington Treaty? And what is it which is called as the collective defense under Article 5? What do you mean by that? And what is the strategic concept of NATO? So a lot of things to understand about this concept of an association between so many countries, and also we can understand a few history about why NATO came into existence. So let's find it out everything in LearnStroke's ExplainWallah with Arjun or Shaankar. So since we have made an opening statement about NATO, we need to discuss some salient features and why the countries are actually engaged with each other. And to understand this, there are so many premises, and I would say why 30 countries, including 2 North American countries and 28 European countries, why they have connected is basically on the premise of security, defense and crisis management. So when you talk about the 30 countries who are in touch with each other, they consult each other in the matters of defense, in the matters of security for everybody, and if there is a crisis management in any of this, they consult big time on that. That is why in 2010, there is a concept called as a strategic concept. There is something called strategic concept which came out in 2010, which clearly underscores NATO's core tasks as collective defense, which again is a defense, crisis management and cooperative security. So these 3 important words are very important for NATO. And what do you mean by this? So since now you know that everything is all about defense, security and crisis management, first they talk about what do you mean by collective defense, because the Article 5 says that attack against one member country is an attack against all. So that is our premise. Attack against one member country is considered as an attack against all. So one NATO member is attacked, they will invoke the collective defense clause of Article 5, and one attack is going on, the whole of the NATO will actually come together. That is the collective defense here. And in the case of Ukraine, Russia, what happened is, since Ukraine was not a member of NATO, the NATO could not take a stand on that. And also you need to understand that apart from the 30 members in the NATO, there is also a list of certain countries which is called as the aspiring members. So who are the aspiring members? Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ukraine and Georgia are considered as some of the aspiring members who would like to join NATO. But that was the case in the present Russian-Ukraine fight. The NATO could not directly support Ukraine, but you know what happened? They could not directly do, they indirectly supported by giving them a lot of weapons, javelin, anti-tank, so many anti-tank missiles, etc. So that is how they do it. So the collective defense is Article 5, and so far the NATO has only invoked the collective defense Article 5 only once, and that was as a response to the famous American 9/11 incident. So that was the first time they invoked it. And when you talk about this, why are the countries coming together? There is a small history to it. And this history is as old as the Second World War. I need to tell you that also. And you need to just go back to the past, 1945, and after the Second World War, what really happened? You know, there was a big time Cold War between United States of America and the Soviet Russia, which were the 2 important blocs, which was even called as the Cold War. That is very clear on this. And after the Second World War, you know that Europe disintegrated so badly. And the main agenda of Europe was to rebuild its country. And how do you rebuild? You need to rebuild the country either through financial, and a lot of things has to be done. So that was a time when America, United States saw this as an opportunity to help Europe rebuild themselves. So that is when Europe started, that means America started to give Europe a financial aid or an economic aid. That was the time when the Secretary of the State of America was Mr. George Marshall, and he initiated a concept called the European Recovery Program, which was called as the Marshall Plan. That was very important. The Marshall Plan came into existence, and that is what you call as a Marshall Plan. And America was considering and determined to give financial aid to Europe to rebuild its country. And soon after some time, by the time 1948, of 1940s and 48, civil war started in Europe, many parts of Europe. Greece, Turkey, there were problems all around the Western Europe. There were civil wars going on, and that was the time which triggered a demand. So far, America was only giving financial aid. That was a time when America decided that it's not financial aid only, we are going to give you military aid. So apart from financial aid, they started to give military aid. So that was the beginning of this. Apart from financial, they ventured into the defense and security aspect. And by 1949, what happened is they created this concept of the Washington Treaty. All the member countries, around 12 countries at that time, they signed what is called as the Washington Treaty. And most importantly, the basic authority of this treaty is coming from the UN Charter of 51. The UN Charter 51 gives the basic authority for such individual countries, because according to Article 51 of the UN Charter, individual or independent countries can form collective for the defense purposes. So that was when Washington Treaty came into force, and slowly that became the basis of NATO. Not only financial aid, security, military aid also coming in. And after 1949, in 1955, the Soviet Russia retaliated to this by creating another group of certain Russian, Soviet Russia and its satellite states, which they called as the Warsaw Pact. So they created a Warsaw Pact in retaliation to the NATO. And after some time, after 1991, when the Soviet Union completely disintegrated, this Warsaw Pact, many of the countries in the Eastern Europe, which were once part of Warsaw Pact, later on switched sides and joined NATO. So this is a small history of how a small group of organizations from 12 members, they reach 30 members now. So they are all concerned about one thing, about political, military, security and defense. And you will be amazed to know that more than 57% of the world defense spending comes from the NATO, and it is for the NATO. And in this, United States of America is the leader, which donates more than 22% of the total military funding. So NATO, that's a huge military funding. And out of this, 3 of the main NATO countries, including US, UK and France, are one of the biggest military or even one of the biggest nuclear powers inside NATO. So that is a brief history of NATO. And if you want to know which are some of the important countries that are part of the NATO, you can just see below. These are some of the 30 important member countries of the NATO. So I think you got a good idea about what is NATO, why NATO was created, and what is that whole thing coming together between the countries, what is the basis of that arrangement. So I hope you really understood that.